Prabhupada Jaya, 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 Prabhupada. Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvajakacharya To Tarasato Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Gruntrad Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Samveda Bhaktivedanta Ki Gaur Premananda. So I notice that it's being recorded, but it's being recorded to the cloud. That means that I won't have access to it, I think, unless I have access to your account on the cloud. So I notice it's being live streamed too, which is good, but
it's going to be uploaded on YouTube. You can access it there.
Yeah, right. All right, anyway, we'll just let it go. I'm recording it from my side, but I won't get any of the blowback from your side. I won't get any of the pictures, or I won't get any of the sound. At any rate, because we're running late, I'm just going to let it go with what we have right now. So we are today going to discuss this Canto 9, Chapter 14, Text 49, King Pururava, enchanted by Urvasi. So this is a quite intricate story, and it's very interesting how these stories tend to interweave with one another. So before I tell much more about this, let me go to okay, I'm going to have to put that back up here. Just a second. I had it all set up, but I didn't count on the fact that my sound would be messed up. Now my sound is okay, but I don't have everything that I originally had. Okay, here we go. So here is our verse today. Pururava seva sit trai treta mukhe nripa agni na prajaya raja lokam gandharvam evan pururavasya eva sit trai treta mukhe nripa agni na prajaya raja lokam gandharvam evan. So this verse translates, this is Canto 9, Chapter 14, Text 49. O Maharaj Parikshit, at the beginning of Treta Yuga, King Pururava inaugurated a Karma Kanda sacrifice. Thus Pururava, who considered the yajnik fire his son, was able to go to Gandharvaloka as he desired. So I'll read that again. O Maharaj Parikshit, at the beginning of Treta Yuga, King Pururava inaugurated a Karmakanda sacrifice. Thus Pururava, who was considered the yajnik fire, yajnik fire his son, was able to go to Gandharvaloka as he desired. And the purport by Srila Prabhupada is as follows. In Satya Yuga, Lord Narayana was worshipped by meditation. Kritiya dhyayato Vishnu. Indeed, everyone always meditated upon Lord Vishnu, Narayan, and achieved every success by this process of meditation. In the next yuga, Treta Yuga, the performance of yajna began. Tretayam yajato makhaya. Therefore, this verse says, Trai Treta Mukhe. Ritualistic ceremonies are generally called fruit of activity. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that in Treta Yuga, the beginning in Swayambhuva Manvantar, ritualistic fruit of activities were similarly manifest from Priyavrata, etc. So this, of course, ends the 9th canto, 14th chapter. And so this verse is kind of a good place to do a summary of what's actually going on in this whole episode. And as we notice, Pururava, King Pururava is kind of the center of this whole episode. He is, excuse me, attracted by Urvasi, and Urvasi is originally she was attracted by him, so they agreed to become husband and wife, and this worked out for the most part. But Urvasi had some stipulations, which we'll talk about in a minute here. But before that, we'll go to the history of this situation. Soma, who is the moon god, he kidnapped the wife of Brihaspati, and her name was Tara. Later, Soma begot a son in the womb of Tara named Buddha. Buddha begot Aila, or Pururava, in the womb of his wife Ila. So Buddha was this son by Soma and Tara. Tara was actually the wife of Brihaspati, but she had a son by Soma. But this son, Buddha, was very powerful and very intelligent. And he had a son in the womb of Ila. And Ila, turns out, if we back up a couple of stories, Ila was none other than King Sudyumna, who had become a woman as a result of this whole odd thing that happened where they went to the area where Lord Shiva causes every male to become a female if they invade that area. So this is what's happening in this part of the story. So King Sudyumna becomes a woman, and as a result of becoming a woman, he has a child with Buddha, and this child becomes Pururava. And Pururava was very attractive. And naturally, he was a king. Most kshatriyas are very attractive. And he attracted the gaze of Urvashi. And Urvashi is a heavenly courtesan. She is one of the apsaras in the heavenly worlds. And we find out her story that, you know, when we find that Indra was worried about the austerities that Nara and Narayan were performing. He sent Kamadev, or Cupid, and a group of heavenly demigoddesses to attract Nara and Narayan to dissuade them from their austerities. But instead, they were not dissuaded, and they simply manifest demigoddesses themselves from their own volition. And instead of cursing the demigoddesses, the apsaras that had come with Kamadev, they gave them a new one, and they could choose whichever one they wanted. All the ones that were created by Narayan were very beautiful, even more beautiful than the ones that they had brought with them. So they chose Urvasi, and then she became a part of the court of Indra when she went back to the heavenly planets. So, at any rate, that's her story. And she saw Pururava and became attracted to him. And he became attracted to her. But she made a stipulation that if they should get together and become married, that he never appeared naked before her except when they were about to have sex, never serve her raw food, which according to the heavenly planets, culinary restrictions is that it has to be cooked in ghee. If something's not cooked in ghee, it's considered raw, according to the heavenly planets. And he also was to protect her two little lambs that she brought with her from the heavenly worlds. So in this way, they enjoyed for many years. But since Indra began to feel that Urvasi was missing, he wanted her back in his court. So Indra set up a plan where he had his servants kidnap these two lambs that belonged to Urvasi. And when she heard the lambs bleeding, that they were being taken, she chastised her husband Pururava and said, you know, what kind of eunuch are you? You were supposed to protect my lambs, and now they're being stolen. I thought you were a great warrior, but I see you're not, you know. And so he ran after the lambs, and he didn't even have time to put on any clothes. So he ran naked, and he managed to get the two lambs back. But when he brought the two lambs back, Urvashi saw him naked and said, well, you told me that you would never appear before me naked except when we're having sex. So we're finished now, and I'm going back to the heavenly planets. And of course, Pururava was heartbroken. And as a result, he desperately missed his wife, Urvashi. But this story goes on. So he meets her again on the banks of the Sarasvati in Kurukshetra. And there, when he meets Urvashi, she agrees to spend one night with him a year. And so this one night they spend together, he is completely satisfied. But he's again plunged into heartbreak when she leaves again after that one night. And she tells him that the Gandharvas can help him be together with her. So he approaches the Gandharvas, and they allow him to associate with her, but actually they substitute an Agnistali girl who looks just like Urvasi. But when Pururava has sex with her, he can see that she's not the same lady. So he understands that he's been switched up here. And later on, as we see this verse, is explaining to us that he performs this sacrifice. So Pururavasa eva sit trai trecha mukhenrapa agnina praya raja lokam gandharvam avyayan. Maharaj Pariksit, at the beginning of Treta Yuga, King Pururava inaugurated a Karmakanda sacrifice as Pururava, who considered the yogic fire his son, was able to go to Gandharva Loka as he desired. This is where Urvashi was staying in Gandharva Loka. So he performed this fire sacrifice and was able to go there. However, the story doesn't really end here. The interesting thing about this story is that it continues on in the 11th canto, we don't hear anymore except about his descendants, but we hear the Ila Gita in the 11th canto, the 26th chapter. And there in the Ila Gita, Krishna is speaking to Uddhava. And Krishna is explaining many important things to Uddhava. And one of the things he explains is this story or song that was sung by Pururava. So this song is quite interesting because Pururava, he describes his attachment to Urvasi and how he gave it up. Of course, we hear in the chapter we just passed, in this 14th chapter of the 9th canto, that Urvasi tries to break Pururava out of his sadness by explaining to him the nature of women. So, she explains that this is all very transient and that women are attracted, but then later on they become unattracted to the same person, and they can even cause a person to be killed or murdered by someone else, and so on and so forth. So she's explaining these things to Pururava, but he's still following her. But later, he has a change of heart, which is described in the 11th canto. It's interesting that many years ago, Radhanath Swami was telling this story that he read that the Srimad Bhagavatam had nothing about fruitive activities or about mental speculation or any of these unwanted things in the Vedas. And so when he read this story about Pururava, he became puzzled that the story ends apparently here in the 9th canto, but where's the moral of the story? Pururava is attracted to Urvasi. She's gone to the heavenly planets. He's just desperate. Finally, he gets admitted to the heavenly planets by performing this fire yajna. But so what happens next? And it was only when the 11th canto came out that he began to realize that this story picks itself back up in the 11th canto in the 26th chapter. And there we learn that Pururava, he becomes detached. He begins to realize that he is actually being simply bamboozled by the material energy. So this is the nature of the material world that we live in. We become bamboozled by the material energy. And for most of us, the biggest bamboozlement is attraction to the opposite sex. So this is how living entities become completely lost in material existence, with the vicissitudes of raising a family, keeping a relationship on cue, dealing with the necessities that arise as one protects and maintains and earns and performs various different kinds of social and governmental functions to keep the family going. And so here in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the 26th chapter, 10th verse, Sa parichadam atmanam hit vatrinam iveshvaram yantim shriyam chanvagamam nagna umata vadrudan. Although I was a powerful lord with great opulence, that woman gave me up as if I was no more than an insignificant blade of grass. And still, naked and without shame, I followed her, crying out like a madman. So this is Pururava's words. This is how he's explaining his situation. And of course, He later on explains, who does the body belong to? We're so attracted to a material body. And so when we say we're not this body, we learn that in general, most people are attached to their body. But besides that, they're usually attached to another body. And as a result, we're attached to two different bodies. And this makes for entanglement in the material world. So Urvashi gave him instructions. And of course, I want to kind of stop and make a quick note here that although the instructions of Urvashi, who is herself a woman, is describing the unfortunate nature of women, it is not that all women have all these bad qualities. These are in general, I always think of these kind of explanations as really explanations of the negative tendencies that a particular group is prone to. Just like we see in other places, we have an explanation of married men, you know, the things that they're prone to. We have explanation of Shudras, the unfortunate qualities that they're prone to. So this doesn't mean that everybody in this class has these bad qualities. However, these are the general tendencies of this body type. And unless one makes an effort to engage in spiritual life, there is a good possibility that some of these negative tendencies will manifest. And this is the nature of Krishna consciousness. We learn to engage in Krishna consciousness so we can rise above our bodily designation. This is what's meant by an upadhi. An upadhi is a material designation, like being a woman or being a Sudra, like being a man or being a Brahmana or any of these classifications. These are all actually upadhis or designations. And if one sincerely engages in devotional service, one will become free from all the bodily designations. And that's what the Vedic literatures tell us, that by engaging in devotional service, we will not be hampered by our bodily designation. So this is the guarantee. So to go further on here, there are two very instructive verses about sex life in Srimad Bhagavatam. And one is from 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And this is King Rishabdev speaking to his 100 sons. Pumsam striyam maituni bhavametam tayor mito hridaya grantim ahu atto grihakshetra sutapta vittair janasya moho yamaham mameti. Attraction between male and female is the basic principle of material existence. On the basis of this misconception, which ties together the hearts of the male and female, one becomes attracted to body, home, property, children, relatives, and wealth. In this way, one increases life's illusions and thinks in terms of I and mine. So this sums it up here. We notice that in the Krishna consciousness movement, in the Vaishnava tradition, we do not exclude marriage, nor do we denigrate marriage. In fact, marriage is a sacred institution. However, the important piece of information that one should always focus on in a marriage situation is that ultimately both the husband and the wife, they have to work towards becoming detached from sex life and from the marriage, understanding that neither of them are the body. And then in the end, we will have to give up the body. And when we give up the body, then we will give up that relationship as well. So whether one is a man or whether one is a woman, one may be attracted to the opposite sex, but eventually we have to live and engage in devotional service, and we'll see that attraction gradually becomes slackened. And of course, as our bodies get nicely old and nicely wrinkled and nicely smell in unusual ways at inopportune times, this becomes a little bit easier to do. But in any case, the idea of engaging in devotional service allows us to work through that romantic and sexual attraction and gradually, on the other side, become partners in spiritual life. And that's actually the right attitude. Otherwise, we see that this attraction between male and female is what makes the world go around and what glues us to this material world. It glues us very solidly. And then we have this very unusual analogy here. This is Prahlad Maharaj, 7:9:45. Yan maitunadi grihamedi sukham hitucham kanduya nena karayor eva dukkha dukkam tripyanti neha kripana bahu dukkha bhaja kanduti van manasi jam vishaheta dhira. Sex life is compared to the rubbing of two hands to relieve an itch. Grihamedi, so-called grihastas who have no spiritual knowledge, think that this itching is the greatest platform of happiness, although actually it is a source of distress. The kripanas, the fools who are just the opposite of brahmanas, are not satisfied by repeated sensuous enjoyment. Those who are dhira, however, who are sober and who tolerate this itching, are not subjected to the sufferings of fools and rascals. So this is the nature of sex attraction. It is like relieving an itch. And no matter how much sex we are able to indulge in, we will never be satisfied. So there's an analogy given that, like the mouth, if the mouth is hungry, then if we feed the mouth, the more we feed it, the less hungry it gets, and finally it's satisfied. But the genitals work in exactly the opposite way. The more you feed them, the hungrier they become. And if you starve them, they become completely satisfied. Of course, this situation is done usually gradually through the process of marriage and undertaking the various responsibilities it takes to raise children. But in any case, we know that lust is our main enemy. And this is described, of course, in Bhagavad Gita. And in Bhagavad Gita, if we go to chapter 3, text 37, I can get there. Here we go. Now, flip over here. And this is the Bhagavad Gita sloka. We learn that Arjuna has asked Krishna why it is that people are impelled to do sinful things, even when they know they're wrong and they know they'll suffer. Why do they still do them? So Arjuna has asked, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? And the answer, of course, is Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material modes of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. Then later, Krishna says, as the fire is covered by smoke, that's the one I want to focus on. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. So this is the nature of lust, that we cannot satisfy lust by meeting the object of lust. We have to gradually satisfy it. How? And Krishna explains that also in Bhagavad Gita. We learn that one can deal with lust by suitable practice and detachment. by regulating the senses. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bhartas, at the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin by regulating the senses and slay this destroyer of knowledge and sense gratification. So we get free from lust by regulating the senses. And so that's the secret. If we regulate the senses, we will become free from us. And that, of course, is naturally done through Krishna consciousness. So I want to leave some time for questions. And I'll see now if anybody in our audience here has questions.
Haribo,
Haribo.
Chandrashekhara Maharaj. This is Bhima Das from Boston, formerly
From
of New
Boston.
Vrindavan.
Oh, that Bhima. Okay. I was wondering which Bhima I was looking at here.
How many are there?
Well, I know about 3.
Nice. How are you doing?
Good.
Wonderful. I think this was very wonderful class. I loved how it began as a narration of the full arch of the story. It just puts it in context. You have a drama, you have, we all call back to the various bits and pieces, but you tied it all together in a long vignette of what's troubling us all. And it was like watching a movie. And then, of course, you got on, transcendental professor that you are, and showed exactly how this is applicable in our lives, especially for those of us who are married. So I just wanted to thank you. I have nothing to say, but bravo, that was wonderful. Hare Krishna.
Well, thank you for the encouragement. But, this is kind of, one of the basic things that people in general don't understand why. We are very cautious about relationships between the sexes. And of course, these days, that can also mean relations between the same sex too, for some people. So this is the thing that tangles us all up. We all know that generally each human being wants to share their life with somebody. And that usually leads into a romantic and usually sexual relationship. Of course, yesterday was Radhastami, and we talked about that angle when we were discussing about the advent of Radharani and the difference between love and lust. And in the material world, love is there, but it needs to be purified. And it's difficult to purify love out of lust, because lust has a selfish motivation. We're always interested in what we will experience. So when we engage in a romantic relationship, ultimately they all lead to some kind of sex activity. But in the spiritual world, we see that this is not the case, that Krishna and Radha, they are not about a erotic relationship. They're about savoring the pure devotion that they display for one another. That not only does Radha display pure devotion to Krishna, but Krishna displays pure devotion to Radha. So it's a two-way street. And in the spiritual world, there's no need for bringing people into the world, because everyone in the spiritual world has always been there and always will be there. So that's not necessary. But in the material world, all this becomes nicely gnarly and problematic until we engage in devotional service, and gradually we begin to realize that we are made into jackasses by sex life. Of course, this is one of the analogies that Pururava uses in the 11th canto. He says that just like a jackass is approaches actually the proper term for the female is the jenny. So you have the jackasses and the jennies. So the jackass approaches the jenny and he gets kicked, and this is the way it works. So the nature is that it's easy to be victimized by the interplay of sex desire. And we see this all the time. Every popular movie, so many places we see this. Men are victimized, women are victimized, everybody is victimized. So the quicker we can come to the stage of trying to serve Krishna and turn this desire for personal sex fulfillment into love of Godhead, the quicker we can do that, the better off we all are. Any other questions there in the assembly that we have with us today? Wow, 22 people. Oh, Adi's got something.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Adi.
You know, we went through these verses where Urvasi is describing women as a class are cunning and they can kill somebody who they, you know, who displeases them and this and that. And then, you know, different devotees have been dialing it back like you just did, said, well, it's not all women. And somebody said, well, it's not an absolute statement. It's not, but as far as I understand, if we just rephrase it a little bit and we say, if you think you're a woman, if you think they're a body, a person who is under the bodily conception, I am a woman, then there's a tendency to try to facilitate the pleasure of the senses of the body at any cost. And it's not just like, not all women are bad. But any person thinks they are a man, a woman, has a tendency to act for the benefit and the enhancement of the experience of the senses of the body. And that can lead to all kinds of weird things. So it's just the bodily identifications that's the problem. We're not talking about women, we're talking about souls who think, I am a woman. And as soon as you say that, that's ignorance, right? I think, as far as I can understand, that's how Prabhupada explained it to us. And sometimes we kind of, oh, it's not all women. What are you talking about? You're not a woman. I don't know. Does that help or not? I don't. You can.
Maybe that's another way of explaining it. If that helps someone, then that's good. I just try to think of this in the terms of statistics and demographics, because I think even in our movement, all too often, this is skewed in a wrong way, you know, that sometimes people in our movement even think that if you're a woman, that's it, you know, that you can never really rise above that. You're always in some kind of situation where that's not our philosophy at all. That yes, we have the Vedic Varnashram system. Yes, there are, you know, various kinds of behaviors and duties incumbent upon women, and those are all general. But at the same time, you know, we beneath it all are souls, because the soul is neither male or female. And usually it may even change from lifetime to lifetime. A man may become a woman in the next lifetime and vice versa. And, you know, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it even suggests that that's generally the way it works, that we flip from one sex to the other when we get reborn. So really, it's about trying to transcend whether we're man or woman or Brahmana or Vaishya or whatever it is. As Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, you know, that I am not a man, I'm not a woman, I'm not a Vaishya, I'm not a Shudra, I'm not a brahmachari, I'm not a sannyasi, I am das anu das, you know, that I am the servant of the servant. So that's our real identification.
Right.
Of course, that's what we're working to identify with instead of identifying with our body, which is, the way we usually work.
Yeah, Shastra says, that anyone in any kind of capacity, woman, Vaishya, Shudra, can rise to the highest platform.
Right, right.
They're willing to be obedient to the spiritual master.
Yeah.
We're over time here. I'm sorry to talk so long.
Well, that's the other thing that, we hear that
A wonderful
sarvo padi vinirmuktam tat paravena nirmalam Rishikesha Rishikena Sevanam Bhakta Uchate, that the Vedic literatures are saying that we can rise above our upadis. If we can't, then, why are we bothering with this whole process of Krishna consciousness?
Right.
It guarantees us that we can rise above them.
Krishna is so wonderful. We're here to glorify the Lord. Krishna is so wonderful that he helps us. I think Angelika wants to say something. She has her hand up.
Okay.
Hare Krishna. This is Angelika.
Oh,
So-
Hare Krishna.
I'm wondering about the point that you mentioned earlier, which is essentially that we have to be very careful about the interactions between, either opposite sexes or the same sexes, depending on our attractions. And so I just want to ask about whether we should be almost like pessimistic and assume that there's danger everywhere and like not befriend our God brothers or Prabhus and actually see them as our spiritual brothers, or to kind of just be more positive and be careful, but at the same time still have that relationships. Like what would you advise in that, and how are we supposed to look at it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that would really require quite a long explanation, but I'll try to give a short feedback on it because we're at time here. Certainly, we should not become impersonal. And actually, I see that in the Krishna conscious movement, there's quite a strong tendency for that. That there is, on one side of the coin, you have some devotees who are so punctilious or, so persnickety about these things that they basically deal with people almost as non-entities. On the other side of the coin, you have people who throw caution to the wind and wind up getting involved in an affair of some kind or another. So it's kind of wisdom to know that middle ground. The most important thing to avoid is being alone together. That's the most important thing to avoid, because that's when things can happen. And we should try to keep our interactions to important service that we're performing for Krishna. And if we're fully absorbed in our service and we're happy doing that, then we do have some leeway to be able to interact with those of the opposite sex and not become, entangled in some way or another. But we always have to be careful, and we have to be especially careful of situations where a man or a woman are alone together with nobody else, because that's when those kind of things can really manifest themselves. So that's how I would reply to that.
Marsh, I have a few people popping up with questions. Angel and Gail and MPD.
Yeah.
It's okay. You can go on.
Do we have the green light to go a little further, or should we just cap it off? So where is
Let's go further. Let's go further.
Okay. So someone else has a question there.
Gail?
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Gail.
Yes, I'm referring. There's a statement that I read in Srila Prabhupada's books. It goes something like, everything in this world is driven by the desire for a sex desire. Mm-hmm. Right? That sounds familiar, right?
Right.
So I'm just trying to make sure that I have proper understanding of that statement, because, when I think of, like, I'm going to do shopping, to make dinner, or I'm going to take a class in the business school, some things is not so obvious that there's a motive of sex desire behind it. So what I'm wondering is, does that statement mean that originally there is a desire to be with, or the companionship for the opposite sex, and then as a result of that initial desire, then things snowball? So is that the way in which sex desire is the root to all activities, or is it more direct than that? Like how I was explaining at first.
No, that's a pretty good capsule summary of how it works. That because there's a romantic interest, that romantic interest leads to the desire for sex, that the desire for sex leads to children and all the things that go with that if one wants to be actually responsible in the world. So there's a lot that goes with it. And of course, sex life is described as adi rasa. So it is the first and the most powerful of all the rasas. And it's described in Vedic literature elsewhere that sex is one of the activities that involves all 5 of the senses simultaneously in a very intense way. Few other things can go to that scope. And in general, as you say, sex is there, but we have so many things that go with it: romance and culture and family tradition and in-laws and, all this other stuff that goes, a lot of the way into describing these things. So, it's what makes the world go around. Very few people, there are people like this in the world, but very few people are actually motivated just toward various kind of physical pleasures. Most people are oriented toward some kind of human interaction. And that human interaction usually gets around to sex in some flavor or another. Oftentimes it's destructive sex, unless the person is making some effort to purify themselves. But that's a pretty good, summary.
A destructive sex?
Yeah. Sex is easily turns into a destructive instrument when not engaged in properly. And we see this everywhere,
You mean violent?
Well, like that. Violent in the sense of physical, also destructive of reputation, destructive of the family situation. We see right now our, state governor is under scrutiny and, all this kind of stuff. No matter who you are, if you do not engage in using sex within even in our so-called modern, very permissive, very open society, we still see that people get called to task for having the wrong kind of sexual relationships with people, having sex with people that are too young, having sex with people where they're forcing something, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a perennial problem. And unless a person is calming the modes of passion and ignorance by devotional service, there's a strong tendency that sex desire can get away from them. And in the wrong moment where there's opportunity, suddenly the sparks fly and one engages in some later regrettable sexual contact of some kind or another. Well, that's why it's destructive.
Srila Prabhupada also mentioned subtle sex, profit, adoration, and distinction.
Yeah.
So there's a gross physical activity, but there's also what's referred to as subtle sex, profit, adoration, and distinction. We try to make ourselves prominent, and that's actually a form of subtle sex.
I'm glad you brought that up, Adi, because actually that's how we become attracted to sex life. The more we want profit, adoration, distinction, the more likely we are going to get pulled into some gross act of inappropriate sex in some way or another, because that's usually what it's predicated on. The more we want to be see our body as special, the more we'll be attracted to some other body in some inopportune, inappropriate way. Those two things are definitely related.
Yeah, actually, I wish you could have expanded on that a little bit more to make it a little plainer, the correlation between those two, wanting.
Well,
yeah.
why do people, it's so interesting. There's so many songs written about it. There's so many movies about it, what comes immediately to my mind, is a song written by what I've forgotten what the band is now, which shows that I must be getting purified. What a fool believes, there's a song like that, and it talks about how when someone isn't in love or what they imagine to be love with someone else, they can't even read the symptoms that the other person is just not interested. They create this complete thing. Why do they create this strange, whole ethos about someone who's not interested in them? How do they create it? Why do they create it? Because everyone believes that they're special. How could the other person not be attracted to them? How could that be possible? It's not possible. I'm just so cool and I'm just so attractive that the other person must be attracted to me, And this shows that this is our ego. But when a person is not egotistical, they can think, I'm not the most powerful, the most good looking, the most intelligent, the most witty person. So, I can understand it. So it's through our infatuation with our own position, our own understanding of ourselves, that we get entrapped in these things where, we have inappropriate relationships with other people because we can't read the signs and we imagine something that's not there. And of course, the thing that substantiates our false ego the most is to know that other people are romantically or erotically attracted to us. That substantiates our false ego. Our ego just drinks it in, as the ultimate nectar, but actually it's setting us up for a serious problem. So I see Nanda Gopal has his hand up. I guess that's a hand.
Hari Bo Maharaj, this is Madan Gopal. I don't know if
Madan Gopal, Hare Krishna. How are you?
Hari Bo. I'm doing well. Thank you for the wonderful class and the nice background and the story. I just wanted to make a comment on the question that was earlier, I think from Anjali, about how careful we should be, and I think you alluded to the answer that we should be. It's a dangerous world out there, and it's very easy to slip and slide and fall. But it's kind of like, when you work in the office and there's vending machines and, if you're just so hungry at 10:30 in the morning, then you'll just attack the vending machine and eat the stuff you're not supposed to be eating. It's really bad for you. But if I had a really good, healthy breakfast in the morning, the proper, good prasadam, nice and hot, nutritious and delicious, then I won't feel hungry because, I had my nice breakfast. So similarly, if we have a very satisfying morning program, it's a very practical thing. Where we have a good japa, we had good association, we had a good class, we had good arti, good kirtan, the morning program, then we're still buzzing with the joy and the bliss of spiritual life. So by the time evening comes, the buzz is probably not worn off. And then you have an evening program, and then that keeps you nourished through the night as well. And so if you have a morning and evening program that is very consistent, and we take it into our hearts and our lives, in our bloodstream on a daily basis, then that the probability of the slipping and sliding and falling is much, much less. And then depending on our nature, some of our natures are more outgoing. We joke with other people more. We talk with, say, girls or boys more. It's hard to, prevent our nature from being itself. Some are more introverted. Maybe they're safer, but not necessarily. I think that the real solution, as you mentioned, Marge, is to be satisfied in Krishna consciousness. And the practical solution is to not let these morning programs get too far between. If we do them more consistently, it's a practical way of remaining safe. I want to add that.
No, I'm glad you added that, Mana and Gopal. That's actually very appropriate. We have to be very, to the degree we can relish our chanting, to the degree we can relish our engagement in devotional service, to that degree we will be safe. If we try to make the world our family by trying to deliver people from material existence, we won't have to have a personal family. Otherwise, but some people want both. Okay, Angel has her hand up now again.
Oh, yes. I just wanted to say thank you so much for this beautiful class. And the one thing that I've learned, like Madana had mentioned, is that those moments in the mornings, like the kirtan, the prayers and all of that, you are truly fulfilled throughout the day. And throughout the mantras, when we're doing japa, it's so interesting because you can understand that it becomes like a healthy detachment of the mind, to understand that it doesn't really direct you. It's just a like a cloud. And you then throughout the day, like they say, sattvic in the morning, sometimes rajas comes at night. So understanding the mode, understanding oneself, how one is really conditioned. And the one thing I really do try and aim for whenever these other entities start to arise or these modes start to hit me is I just say the Maha Mantra and I breathe. And it really helps me. And then it makes me, well, it doesn't make me, I can obviously see that it's Krishna's heart in the other being. And either way, whatever action or thought or however they're looking at me or however I'm looking at them, it reminds me that I'm fulfilled either way. So yeah, thank you so much for this beautiful class. So I just want to say, like, survival mode, putting oneself in survival mode is very easy. That's also like it becomes Rajas mode, and it's not always at balance and harmony. So it's just how having that healthy detachment of understanding that, oh, this is coming up, and now let me just say the Maha Mantra, because this is what's gonna put me at ease, and I don't have to feel guilty in the future. But thank you.
I thank you for that too. It's, I think one of the things we should always realize is this is probably the biggest stumbling block for almost everybody. It's not that some people are exempt. I think probably for 98% of human beings, this is the biggest thing that they have difficulty with. So if one is satisfied and happy in Krishna consciousness, like you were saying, then the tendency to look elsewhere is less likely. But still, we always have to be careful to avoid, as usually they call it in Christianity, the near occasion of sin. We have to kind of avoid situations which give too much possibility, and again, that central thing is being alone together. That's where we really are walking on thin ice there. So that's why we have to be careful. All right.
Let everybody participate. This is a community, and we hear each other's hearts and realizations. Wonderful. How wonderful is Krishna?
Jai. So I'm going to cap it off here, and I thank you all for tuning in. And we look forward to seeing everybody again next month, at least on this channel. I'm sorry I'm not giving more classes recently because I've gotten so far behind on stuff. And I'm giving a Bhakti Shastri class here in the Brooklyn Temple every Wednesday. So that's kind of really soaking it up for me.
Thanks for
Okay.
coming on, Maharaj. Thanks everybody for
Jai.
listening and speaking. Hare Krishna.
All glories to
Hare Krishna. Thank you all so much. And all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the
Hare
Lord.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.